Proving triangle congruence, SSS. Is triangle DOG congruent to triangle CAT? If we can show that the three corresponding sides are congruent, then they are congruent, meaning if segment OD is congruent to segment AC, segment DG is congruent to segment CT, and segment OG is congruent to segment AT, then the two triangles are congruent. Triangle DOG is congruent to triangle CAT. Side postulate states that if three sides of one triangle are congruent to three sides of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. Another important postulate in proving triangle congruence is segment addition postulate. If points P, Q, and R are collinear, and Q is between points P and R, then PQ plus QR equals PR. For example, LO plus OV equals LV, and OV plus VE equals OE. Aside from the postulates, these properties and definitions are also important. Reflexive property. A figure is congruent to itself. This is useful when triangles share the same side or angle. In this figure, segment GO is congruent to segment GO. Definition of midpoint. Midpoint is just the middle point of a line segment. This results in two segments being congruent. If point O is the midpoint of segment BY, then segment BO is congruent to segment YO. Definition of segment bisector. The bisector divides a line segment into two equal parts. This results in two segments being congruent. For example, segment TY and segment SD bisect each other at U. This implies that segment TU is congruent to segment YU, and since they bisect each other, segment SU is congruent to segment DU. Definition of congruent segment. Congruent segments are line segments that are equal in length. If segment LO is congruent to segment VE, then LO is equal to VE. Last is addition property of equality. For all real numbers A, B, and C, if A equals B, then A plus C equals B plus C. Let's prove triangle congruence using two-column proof. Example 1. Given segment JB is congruent to segment JY, point O is the midpoint of segment BY, prove triangle JOB is congruent to triangle JOY. After knowing the given and what to prove, put appropriate marks on the figure. Segment JB is congruent to segment JY. Segment JO is congruent to itself. And if point O is the midpoint of segment BY, then segment BO is congruent to segment YO. The marks show that three corresponding sides are congruent. Let's organize our statements and reasons using the two-column proof. One column for the statements and the other for the reasons. Statement 1. Segment JB is congruent to segment JY. It's given. 2. Segment JO is congruent to segment GO. It's reflexive property. 3. Point O is the midpoint of segment BY. 3. Given again. Number 4. Segment BO is congruent to segment YO. It is definition of midpoint. We already have three corresponding sides congruent. 1, 2, 3. So statement number 5 is triangle JOB is congruent to triangle JOY, and the reason is SSS postulate. Example number 2. Given segment ES is congruent to segment LO, point C is the midpoint of segment EL and segment SO. Prove that triangle SEC is congruent to triangle OLC. Let's put marks on the figure. Segment ES is congruent to segment LO, given. Since C is the midpoint of segment EL and segment SO, segment EC is congruent to segment LC, and segment EC is congruent to segment OC. Note that we already have three corresponding sides congruent. Let's start our two-column proof. Segment ES is congruent to segment LO, given. The next is point C is the midpoint of segment EL and segment is O. That is also given. Since point C is the midpoint of segment EL and segment SO, then segment EC is congruent to segment LC, and that is definition of midpoint. And also for number 4, segment EC is congruent to segment OC. Again, definition of midpoint. We already have three corresponding sides congruent. Therefore, triangle SEC is congruent to triangle OLC. The reason is SSS postulate. Example number 3. Given segment ST is congruent to segment DY, segment TY and segment SD bisect each other at U. Prove triangle SUT is congruent to triangle DUY. Okay, let's put marks on the figure. Segment ST is congruent to segment DY, that's given, our first S. Since segment TY and segment SD bisect each other at U, segment TU is congruent to segment YU, our second side. Segment SU is congruent to segment DU, our third side. Now that we already have three corresponding sides congruent, let's start our two-column proof. Our first statement is segment ST is congruent to segment DY, that is given. Number 2, segment TY and segment SD bisect each other at U, that is also given. Third statement is segment TU is congruent to segment YU, that is definition of segment bisector. And number 4, segment SU is congruent to segment DU, again definition of segment bisector. We already have three sides congruent, so triangle SUT is congruent to triangle DUY, that is SSS postulate. Example 4. Given segment ML is congruent to segment YO, segment MV is congruent to segment YE, segment LO is congruent to segment VE. Prove triangle MLV is congruent to triangle YOE. The two triangles overlap, and if you're going to separate the two triangles, it looks like this. Let's put marks on the two triangles. Segment ML is congruent to segment YO, our first congruent side. Then segment MV is congruent to segment YE, our second congruent side. Now we have to prove that segment LV is congruent to segment OE for our third congruent side. Okay, let's start our two-column proof. Our first statement is segment ML is congruent to segment YO, given. Next is segment MV is congruent to segment YE, given also. Number 3 is segment LO is congruent to segment VE, given. If segment LO is congruent to segment VE, then LO is equal to VE. That is definition of congruent segments. Next, we're going to add OV to the equation in number 4. LO plus OV is equal to OV plus VE. That is addition property of equality. Looking at the figure and the statement in number 5, LO plus OV is equal to LV, and OV plus VE is equal to OE. That is segment addition postulate. Now we have three corresponding sides congruent. Therefore, triangle MLV is congruent to triangle YOE. The reason is SSS postulate. That's all for now.